Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Nicole Lindenbaum, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at PeopleDoc. I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar, Why Employees Deserve HR Innovation. This webinar is the first in a series of 3, which will discuss the blueprint for modern HR service delivery. In the next few days, you'll receive an invitation for our second webinar in the series. I just have a few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be in listen-only mode throughout the session. If you can't see the presentation or hear the presenters, please alert us through the chat. Additionally, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to use chat for that as well, and we'll address your questions in a live Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. And finally, we'll be using the hashtag #SoftwareForThePeople on Twitter today. So please feel free to engage in the conversation on Twitter via hashtag #SoftwareForThePeople. So for those of you who aren't familiar with PeopleDoc, we offer an HR service delivery platform. Through case management and a knowledge base, as well as process automation and document management, we transform how HR delivers services to employees, raising the bar for the employee experience. And speaking of employee experience, I am excited to introduce you to our 2 guests for today, both of whom have a lot to say about employee experience. Lisa Nelson currently serves as SVP of HR for Match Group, where she is responsible for leading talent, culture, and all things related to people. Lisa previously served as the Senior Director of HR for IAC. Prior to that, she served as the Chief Talent Officer of the Arnell Group, a subsidiary of Omnicom, a leading global advertising and marketing communications network. Lisa has also led recruiting teams for search firms based in London and New York, including Robert Walters and Michael Page International. Lisa earned her BA from the University of Western Australia and an MBA from Southern Methodist University. Welcome, Lisa. William Tincup is the president of Recruiting Daily. At the intersection of HR and technology, he's a writer, speaker, advisor, consultant, investor, storyteller, and teacher. He's been writing about HR-related issues for over a decade. William serves on the board of advisors and board of directors for 15 HR technology startups. William is a graduate of the University of Alabama of Birmingham with a BA in art history. He also earned an MA in American Indian Studies from the University of Arizona and an MBA from Case Western Reserve University. So I'm going to tee up the webinar with some recent Gartner research regarding modern HR service delivery. This research note outlines 3 key challenges facing HR today. Number 1 is increasingly global workforces and flexible work arrangements create complexity for HR. Number 2, traditional service delivery models result in miscommunications and long resolution times. And number 3, today's employee expectations require HR to meet an array of process and technical challenges. I'm sure these challenges are no stranger to anyone who's on this webinar. They're providing us the basis for the whole series. And as a thank you for attending this webinar today, we're going to provide you with a link to download the Gartner research note, which outlines key recommendations that you can take with you to meet these challenges. And so with that, let's get started with Lisa and William. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Great to be here, Nicole.
Great. So Lisa, I'm going to kick it off to you. Match's mission is to help singles find the kind of relationships they're looking for. Giving your customers a great experience is in your DNA. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're doing the same for your employees?
Yeah, sure, Nicole. It's a great question. And, you know, I'm sure everyone on the webinar can relate to the idea that, you know, no matter how hard you try to make your employees happy, you kind of have to keep trying harder. It's sort of an infinite effort towards delivering a culture which is attractive to new hires and engages existing hires. And it's something that I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about and probably could be, you know, even much better at. So I sort of feel like it's a never-ending goal. Through technology, we've been trying to apply and assess in areas where we're still sort of behind the curve from a tech standpoint, consumer-grade applications in recruiting, in onboarding, in branding, and I think as importantly in terms of communication that appeal to our employees so that we can deliver information, we can deliver company messages in a medium and housed in content that they're familiar with and that they would choose outside of their ordinary work experience.
Great, great. So you mentioned consumer-grade experiences and consumer-grade technology. You know, I think we see great experiences every day from apps like Uber and Google and Amazon and even Match itself. And because of this, the workforce has higher expectations for workplace technology than ever before. So William, I'm going to throw this one to you. How do you think companies can leverage this as an opportunity instead of a challenge throughout the employee journey?
Right. Well, I think journey, the wonderful part about journey is you got to think about procession. What do we, how do we unlock senses? What do we want them to feel? What do we want them to see? What do we want them to think? What do we want them to, at every moment, what do we want them to experience? And so it becomes kind of experiential that we think of, okay, there's 3 different relationships a business can have with a human being. That's one of a candidate, that's one of as an employee, and that's one as an alumni. And so at different stages, you want different types of relationships with them in their journey. They need different things from you. So in the candidate experience, let's just say on the front end of talent acquisition, there's a whole lot of romance. We're trying to get them to buy into and believe in what we are doing, our values, our ethics, our morality, everything behind the veil. We're trying to kind of believe in, we're trying to believe in them and getting ourselves to believe in them and what they bring to the table. And we want them to believe in us. Once they're onboarded as an employee, we want them to experience something different because now they've made the decision, we've made the decision, we're together. And so almost at each stage, employees need different things from us, and different employees need different things from us at different times. So it's almost like you have to have a finger on the pulse of each employee as to what they need at that particular time. So how does technology help us leverage that? To come to understand where they are and anticipate, wow, that's a loaded word, anticipate their needs. What do they need next from us? And I won't bore anyone with different generations needing different things because I think it's a little bit overplayed, but I think that, you know, not all the times do your employees raise their hand and say, I need this from you. You know, they might not even know that they need training or they need skill development or that they need mentorship or buddy programs or whatever. So it's not just on the employee to tell us when they need something. It's on us to be constantly trying to find out, are we doing okay? Is there anything else that would make you more successful in the job that you're at? So that journey, the way that we play with that word, is that journey through that entire experience. Again, candidate, employee, all the way to alumni. Once you get to alumni and you've parted ways, so to speak, the employee needs something, the former employee needs something different from you as well. And again, not always do they raise their hand and tell you what that is. So the last thing I'd suggest, you know, to the audience is that we think of onboarding. Usually we think of onboarding incorrectly. We think of it as a smaller time period, a day, 2 days, a binder, a checklist, a week of things to do. And truthfully, if we do onboarding right, it's their entire first year of cumulative experiences. That becomes their onboarding experience. So we need to think bigger and broader and deeper when we think of onboarding, because there's a whole host of experiences along that journey that we're missing. So I'd like to the audience to think differently about onboarding in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I love the idea of when they're a candidate, you're romancing them, and then when they're an employee, you're now in this real relationship, and it's got to have that same level of give and take that you'd expect from any relationship. So I think that's really interesting. Lisa, what have you done at Match to leverage consumer-grade workplace technology for your employees?
Yes, well, we, I guess for the past, 18 to 24 months in a very focused fashion have been on a very specific agenda of modernization and basically bringing a best-in-class technology across all of our HR applications. And when we embarked upon this project a couple years ago, we sort of had two paths that we evaluated, one being to sort of purchase a soup-to-nuts solution which would handle all aspects of the employee's life cycle with our business, from recruitment right through to alumni status, and the other would be to sort of select and implement best-in-class products in each of our core sort of employee verticals, if you like. And we ended up choosing strategy, which has definitely resulted in a much more positive yield and ROI for us, because they're really delivering what we think to be best-in-class products in each of those sort of aspects of the life cycle. It has brought with it somewhat of a challenge, because as we've scaled as an organization between acquisitions, organic launches of businesses like Tinder, our employee base has grown significantly. We've really had to find some unique ways to integrate these kind of best-in-class tools across different platforms, and it hasn't been without its challenges. I'd probably still recommend that approach. Certainly for our business it worked, but HR practitioners really have to think about what works. Some of the areas that we've innovated and really overhauled have been, performance management, employer branding, personnel files. I mean, we probably now, as sort of a support function in the Match business, have the least paper of any of our, counterpart teams, and we're actually in the process of moving offices, and sort of HR is now being pointed to as the gold standard in terms of document management and cloud-based storage, and that is, that sort of stems from our relationship with PeopleDoc. So, we've really revolutionized quite a few areas that had been, there had been no support for change in those areas in the past. And I think it's created not only a much more enriching experience for our broad employee base, it's given our managers and our executives access to more information, and it's also designed more enjoyable jobs for the folks in our HR team, which I'm very passionate about, sort of automation wherever it's possible, and allowing people to really focus on the aspects of their job that they're excited about, whether it's, global mobility, immigration, employment branding, university recruiting, these things that really add strategic value to the overall operations of your business.
Wow, that's really impressive and really great. Have you seen your employees' expectations change over time as you've started to adopt some of these new tools?
I think people's expectations in general of just how they're communicated to, how much access to information they have, we've all seen that change. I've seen that change very sort of distinctly, even in myself as an individual and a professional. There hasn't been sort of an inflection point per se. I just think it's been sort of a general expectation, and I think to William's point, often people don't know what they're missing out on or aren't asking for it, but when you bring it to them, it really can be transformational. And one interesting statistic was we had always been doing very archaic performance management with a Word document and HR using an Excel spreadsheet to sort of track compliance and performance. And we don't care about what percentage of people actually do the process. We just want to make sure that real-time conversations are taking place between managers and their reports, so that surprises in performance don't occur. People are getting feedback on how they should be, investing in their career development. It's more about the conversation than it is about compliance with the process. But at best, in our old sort of practice, we were seeing about 60% of employees complete reviews. When we went to an online system, and it's a pretty basic tool that we're using, but it's fairly user-friendly. In our first review cycle, we had 98% completion. And without any nudging by the company, it was just something that happened very organically to just communicate using an a sort of a medium that they're much more accustomed to. So to your question on whether or not we've seen sort of this, I know you didn't use the word drastic, but there hasn't been sort of a moment in time at which we notice this mass shift in behaviour, but I think just in general, you know, we should do our best as HR folks to keep up with the way people in our organisations have become accustomed to communicating, to absorbing information, and to, you know, reaching out into their network and you know, building relationships with fellow colleagues and professionals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. William, do you have anything to add to that?
No, she nailed it.
Well, I guess I'm curious, you know, we talk a lot about, as we talk about the consumerization of these technologies, there's a lot of discussion around mobile and social. And so, yeah, maybe I think a lot of the times you guys are totally spot on. You know, employees don't necessarily know what they want until they get it. But I do feel there is a little bit of a pull for requests for, I need this to be mobile, or I need some social interaction. I'm curious your thoughts around that, and how you've seen that influence, you know, different ways that HR is interacting with employees. Either one, Lisa, I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I might share some thoughts, and I'm certain William has some really interesting ideas in this space as well. You know, obviously mobile and social are very important sort of developments in this era of communication. I'm somewhat sort of careful to not follow trend just because it's trend, and to really think about, you know, what is mobile adoption? What does it mean in this aspect of our people operations? And in some cases, there's a very strong argument for it, and in others, not so much, to be quite honest. Interestingly, I was evaluating a business that supports immigration work. You know, we do a lot of internal mobility as well as hiring foreign nationals, where, you know, there is a legitimate need. And, you know, we're talking to a group of customers that were using this technology, and virtually none of them actually interacted, including the candidates that were in the pipeline, with the technology on the app or the mobile web experience. So that was sort of a statistical example which kind of debunked this assumption that employees and, you know, even HR practitioners are always requiring mobile parity. So I think there are some cases where it does make a lot of sense, and there are others where it's a little bit more faddish, and I think you really have to make a very informed decision about, are you creating value, or are you just pursuing sort of mobile adoption because it's a fashionable thing to do. On the social space, like any, you know, good recruiting team, several years ago we started to invest a lot more time and a little bit more money in social, although we do most of our stuff grassroots here. And one of the interesting outcomes there was we started to develop more engagement with our existing employees on social than we did with candidates. So we actually haven't seen a lot of conversion through our mobile channels of candidates in the pipeline, but we've seen a lot of information sharing and relationship building amongst our existing employees. And I think, Laura, you sort of asked a question a bit ago to pose to William about the opportunity, and this is what really excites me about being in HR right now and having global decentralized workforces, is that we have a technology ecosystem which allows us to bring down barriers very, very quickly and to find ways to communicate with employees across geographic boundaries in a way that we've never done before. And I think that's what makes this sort of HR technology innovation just so exciting, and I think it's an opportune time for us all to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'd add just a couple things. On the mobile side, adding to what Lisa's already said, is you meet people where they are. At the end of the day, if your audience, and in this case the audience is employees, if the audience is mobile, then your application should be mobile. Let's just say that we were all running a logistics company in Arkansas that, you know, basically consisted of truckers. Ironically, truckers are very mobile. Extremely mobile, iPads and iPhone usage or smartphone usage, etc. So in that particular case, if we didn't serve them in a mobile way, we'd be fools, because we wouldn't be able to require to them to go to a terminal or a desktop or a laptop or whatever. Would be foolish, because our audience, that's not how they play. They play extremely mobile centric. So I think on some levels, on the mobile side, to everything that Lisa said, you have to have an understanding of where they are, and you're not trying to force them to be something that they're not, so meet them where they are. On the social side, I think my best advice is also in tandem with Lisa's, is that it just shan't be forced, okay? If your audience, again, when I use the word audience, I speak like a marketer, I apologize. When your employees are extremely social. So if you were to do TrustSphere is kind of a social networking analysis tool. Let's say you use TrustSphere and you found out that all your employees are on Instagram, they all have Snapchat, they're all very social. If you have a social strategy that's kind of lordish, and you're lording over them and trying to make them not be social, that's kind of foolish, actually, and it's wrought with failure. Transversely, if you have an audience or employees that aren't social, that's just not their bit. They might be on LinkedIn or they might be on Facebook, but it's really just friends and family, and they're just really not social. Trying to force them to become social is also foolish. So it's almost like you have to have in HR today, you have to have the acknowledgement of, okay, where are they at right now? What's the sense of where they are right now? And let's create guidelines and policies that enable them for success, rather than force them in one way or another, either to be not social or to be extremely social in ways that are just unfamiliar to them and unnatural to them. Whatever we should do should be an extension of things that they're already kind of comfortable with. So that's the advice I'd give.
Great. So I'll move to the next topic. William, you spend a lot of time studying this industry, working with HR technology companies that are innovating, working with leading HR organizations globally. So I think you get a lot of exposure to this kind of thing, and I'm very curious to know your opinion. In your opinion, what is the future of work, and how do you see organizations adapting to these changes?
So everyone, get out a piece of paper and then draw an X, and on one of those label that value, and label the other line talent. It's at that crisscross that is where value and talent intersect. That's the future of work. The way that we've defined it in the last 30 or 40 years is kind of a full-time, part-time, occasionally some seasonal workers, etc. So the talent has changed and will continue to change right in front of us. And so how do we interact with talent in the future is really kind of up to us. How do we choose to interact with the talent? Because the talent is changing. We can all kind of read the same leaves there. That's changing. How do we want to interact with that talent to get the value? Because the value of our firms does change. Maybe what we thought we were going to market with after 15 or 16 pivots, maybe the value is a bit different, but really it's that interaction with talent. That's what's really pushing us in the future, is how do we interact, how do we identify how talent wants to work? And is that outsourced? Is it offshored? Is it a separate agency? Is it spun out? Is it full-time, part-time, seasonal, contract to hire, through a staffing firm, through an RPO? Like there's, I could go on, but people would get more bored if I keep cutting it. But talent is continuing to morph and change away from us, and away from kind of some primitive ways that we interact with talent. And so it's really kind of up to us to then identify what is that talent doing, the talent that's most critical to our business, and how do we interact with it in the future? Like take the baby boomers. They're not all going to retire next Tuesday, and we don't want them to retire all next Tuesday. Maybe we work with those folks that have institutional knowledge and learning and experience. Maybe we work with them 2 days a week. Maybe we go to them and say, hey, you don't want to retire and like get out of the game completely. but you also don't want to come into work every day. Why don't we work together differently? Why don't we reframe this relationship to where we can still get the most value out of you and you can get value out of this experience? But it forces us to think about those relationships and that interaction with talent in a much different way. So when you say the future of work, I think of it as two things. I think that crisscross, the value part is going to shift nominally, but the talent part of that is shifting almost immeasurably right now. So I think it's how do we interact with talent in the future that becomes the future of work.
Do you have any examples of organizations you've seen recently doing really innovative things to try to meet that talent and the way that it's changing?
Yeah, I alluded to with the baby boomers. I've seen a couple firms do buddy programs where you take millennial talent, especially female talent, and I think it's in everyone's best interest that we say, you know what, the future of our leadership is actually in women leadership development. How do we actually manufacture that? What do we got to do? Great women's programs, women's leadership programs in place to help them get all the things that they need. So I've seen this in two different cases where they're taking these, I would say, older male, ironic but true, these older men in their 70s and early 80s that still want to work a day a week. You know, they don't want to retire because they receive retirement as death. They want to stay in the game a little bit, but they see themselves as kind of parting a lot of wisdom and legacy and knowledge. And so I've seen those partnerships with women leadership development programs that say, you know what, we're going to create buddy programs between these retiring guys and these younger women that aspire to greatness. And it's actually, what's great about it is it gets us to the goal of having great women leaders in the future faster. And I think that's what businesses, why they would invest in something like that, is it gets you there, get you to the point of having those leaders, enabling those leaders to be successful faster.
Great. So you alluded to sort of the shifts in the workforce, and I think with the rise of the contingent workforce and mobility and remote work environments, and even the social and mobile we already spoke about, the employee-employer rules of engagement have changed. And I also think the perception of HR is changing with that as well. So Lisa, coming back to you, in a perfect world, how would you like your match in place to think about HR?
Yes, well, it's a great question, and you know, I'm sure many of you as HR professionals have been sort of greeted at happy hours or events where you've sort of been referred to as, you know, the evil compliance-driven HR team, and I'm sure, you know, none of us sort of subscribe to that mentality. It's a very antiquated view of the organization, but I think it's still, you know, implicit in a lot of organizations because of the sort of the trade-off between, you know, obviously being responsible for growth and optimization of resources, as well as some of the more procedural and compliance-driven elements of the organization, which we would be negligent to, you know, to overlook in our HR roles. But it is something that I'm pretty passionate about, sort of transforming the overall view of HR and to really make it a profession to which young people aspire. I think, you know, I've said this in a few speaking events I've had in the recent past, that most of us fall into it, you know, by chance or, you know, good or bad luck. Hopefully it's good, but it's not really a profession that people sort of, you know, grow up wanting to enter. And I think if we really work diligently to deliver upon this kind of idea that, you know, HR should be the group that helps the company achieve its strategic objectives and does so by delivering, you know, a very well-resourced, competent, well-managed and engaged group of employees. And it sounds like a simple charter, but given the sort of variability in human behavior and the competition in the majority of our you know, individual categories, it's actually a very difficult thing to achieve. But I do think being focused on what the company is achieving and being aligned to it is very, very important. And being able to delight executives, employees, you know, candidates along that journey by really bringing together the best optimized, workforce. And, it's a very aspirational goal, but, and there are probably days where folks at our company see us as nothing further than that, but that's really what we wake up every morning trying to achieve, knowing that there are going to be, there's going to be learning along the way.
So do you think these changes in technology that we're seeing and the way we've really moved towards this consumer level of software, does that make it easier or harder to reach those goals?
I happen to think it makes it quite a bit easier because, for the first time, you're sort of, as I've said earlier, bringing information and power to folks in a way that they're accustomed to receiving it. So I'm a big advocate of technology. I don't think it solves, it allows you to achieve it without thinking, more strategically about what you do every day. But I think it's a huge catalyst for improving, the general reputation and contribution. I think you get to that point, of being considered as a strategic, team by solving business problems and responding to what's going on in your company. You don't get to it through technology alone, but I think technology is a very strong conduit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you had said something before earlier on about as you're expanding globally, technology helps you solve some of that. So I'm curious, how you think about using technology to bring you closer to these global employees that might be under different HR policies or, different local customs and things like that. But, how does technology enable you to be closer to those employees?
It's a great question. And, I mentioned earlier, social has been a very good channel for us, very organically. Like, we didn't launch our social campaign and strategy with the goal of achieving more buy-in and engagement and sort of communication between our employees around the world, but that's actually what we've been seeing. And with our social, as previously mentioned, it's almost all grassroots. We sort of go for very low-hanging fruit content that we think is going to be appealing, but now we're sort of catering it with more of a global audience in mind, and also just generating buzz, competition, contests that are going to appeal to our global employee workforce. At the same time, we're implementing and assessing some sort of global products from an HR standpoint that can kind of lay on top of the existing systems in our, in the businesses in which we operate around the world. And again, it's very much about achieving that balance between allowing your non-US businesses to continue to have the autonomy and sort of control that helps them be effective, but having a level of sort of technology synergy that creates sort of a global view on the organization.
Yeah, that, if I can, Nicole, that tracks with what I'm seeing with millennials as well. When millennials are in the recruiting process, something that wouldn't have happened 25, 30 years ago is you wouldn't have a candidate ask what's next. That wouldn't have happened 25, 30 years ago. You'd have been just happy to get the job that was right in front of you. Now what's happening, what's changing recruiting is millennials are saying, yeah, I get it. You want me to do this job 9, 12 months or so. I'm going to be successful. Then what's next? And Lisa said it very early on about internal mobility. What's interesting is recruiters haven't really had to have great discussions around training, learning, skill development, and internal mobility. They've just been able to talk about the job, the company, the values, the job, maybe even the hiring manager, the manager, team, or some of those types of things. Now they're being forced to talk about what's next, what's after that job. So communicating and being able to communicate, I think it's the firms like Match that have that have great thoughts about internal mobility, about, hey, yeah, once you're good here, do a great job here, with success comes options, here's what some of the things you could be doing next. I think that tracks with everything that I'm saying on the front end in terms of the recruiting process.
Great. So we'll move on to the next topic, which is the theme of this webinar. We started off this discussion talking about modern HR service delivery, and Matt has had some tremendous innovation there. So Lisa, why do you think innovation is important? And do you have any thoughts as to why it's taken other companies maybe a little bit longer to get this on their agenda?
Yeah, and you know, I certainly empathize with companies that are going through the struggle and the desire to be more progressive in their HR technology, and we are certainly not leading the field. We've got a long way to go, so we would definitely continue to empathize with that position. You know, there's probably a lot of generalizations that I could use to answer this question, you know, such as, you know, HR people are not typically the most disruptive innovators in the room, you know, tends to, as a profession, attract a more risk-averse person, but I'm sort of going to put them aside for a moment and give you, you know, what I think are probably the two biggest reasons why we have resistance to change. I think in general, most HR people are actually very, very good at what they do day to day and don't tend to drop the ball on things. So, you know, payroll is done, and we sort of have a zero tolerance for any payroll issues, and we could have one pay period where there are, you know, 250 or 260 discrete changes that need to be tracked, you know, between the three people that touch payroll in my HR team, myself being one of them. So we have a very high standard of accuracy and not letting the ball drop regardless of what's required. If that means a lot of manual intervention, a lot of paper, a lot of record keeping and sort of individual systems of reminding ourselves on what to do, it very rarely, and you know, I don't want to sort of jinx myself here, but very rarely do we make a mistake in the core HR areas. And so the absence of sort of a mistake or a very visible problem doesn't create appetite amongst the executive team to sort of make the investment in new technology and new ways of doing things. I think that's one very big reason. And I think the second reason is just, you know, historically, we are a support function, obviously. We're a non-revenue generative team for the most part, and it then becomes more difficult to have influence when the company is evaluating competing capital investments, right? Are we going to spend $1 million on a new HRIS, or are we going to spend $1 million on a new, you know, CRM system? In that sort of scenario, the CRM system is going to garner much more sort of support. So I think if you can find ways to solve critical business issues related to your people through technology, and of course make the business case, demonstrate the ROI, demonstrate the irresistibility, I think we'll have a lot better chance of overcoming sort of those implicit and explicit hurdles that, you know, come up in times when we're considering significant investments in technology.
Great. And with that example of the HRIS versus CRM or whatever tool might be competing for the budget, you know, how do you consider the needs of your employees? And I mean, employees for the company overall, but also your HR employees who you mentioned earlier have really transformed their roles and are doing work they enjoy. You know, are you able to quantify that and make cases for that along the way?
I haven't really found a quantitative way of measuring the improvement in, you know, individual HR team members' job satisfaction. That's always kind of an important goal for me as I think about, you know, we are currently considering a new HRIS, and we've spent the last, you know, 3 to 4 months speaking to and evaluating different partners. But a big driver for me in undertaking this sort of research over the last few months has been precisely to give my team exposure to a product that is going to make their life, you know, more enjoyable, and to sort of minimize the amount of reporting requests they have to respond to, and again, as I said earlier, really help them focus on value-add activities. So that's an important driver for me. I haven't actually figured out a way to build that into a business case, but if, you know, any of the audience members have some ideas, I'd love for you to raise it in Q&A, or, you know, contact me after the webinar.
Great. So William, what do you typically see as barriers to innovation in HR, and how can companies look to overcome those?
Well, the barrier is singular, is status quo. We're already doing it this way. And that's part mindset, that's part risk management. It's part of just, people hate change. Turns out, news at 11, people hate change. But it's the status quo. It really is. You can be dealing with people that are still doing payroll in QuickBooks or in Excel, and because they've been doing it that way for 15 years, just the simple change. Yeah, you're going to get all this other good stuff, but just change itself is crippling for many people. Actually, I think if we were to be honest, we'd say all of us don't really like change, and so technology change comes with it. Is that, yeah, there's an upside, there's innovation, there's all kinds of great pros that comes from it, but the sad truth is people are scared. So you have to mitigate why they're scared and how they're going to get to a new and greater place faster. So I think some of the discussion when you deal with technology change, you have to do that kind of price, quality, speed discussion with people. It's like, okay, well, does this get you there cheaper? Okay, yes, no, maybe. Does this get you to a better outcome? Yes, no, maybe. And does this get you faster or at the same speed? And so if you're making a case to somebody, it's got to kind of hit on all three of those, or at least have some type of substantial movement on two of those for people to then even consider the change, unless the change is forced. And I would tell you that forced change is never a good thing. Top down, CFO buys brand new technology, HR now is given a brand new technology and they're forced to change. That usually ends up not going too well, or it takes really long to implement because, again, it was forced change. So I think anything you can do to get past the status quo to help manage people's anxieties around change in general, because people are, that Excel payroll description I gave a second ago, the thing is that people that are doing that and been doing that for 15, 20 years are confident and competent at that model. And so when we change, we've shaken that a bit. We've shaken their confidence. We've shaken their competence. And so how do we resurrect those in a way really quickly into kind of the old way versus new way? So in the new way, price, quality, and speed, we got to make compelling arguments for why it's going to help them. I think Lisa said a second ago about making their lives better. This has got to make their lives better. Any technology change that we want them to take on, again, it's the irony of all of this is this isn't in their job description. We haven't really talked about that too much, but technology change, it's not written in anybody's job description. This is all extra. I mean, you could say if you want to take a hardcore approach that we're paying them for it because we have them salary and benefits, but this isn't actually a part of anyone's job. To manage change. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say to that point, Lisa, I'm curious if you've had to implement any change management programs as you've rolled out different technologies or different processes.
We haven't yet, but certainly if we, do go live on this new HRIS, that will affect every employee in our company globally in a positive way, but there would certainly be some, I think, case at that point to support the rollout and implementation with some actual change management resource.
Great. Okay, so I think that actually covers the discussion points that we wanted to cover in this webinar. And so now we're going to open up the Q&A to all of our attendees. If you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and enter it in the chat window. We've had quite a few actually come in during the webinar, but feel free to keep adding on. So, okay, I see this one in a couple places. When will the recording be available? We'll be emailing out the recording of the webinar within 24 hours, and again, it will have that link to the Gartner research. Next, we are looking into ways to change our HR service delivery. Where do you recommend we start? Lisa, do you have thoughts to kick us off around that one?
It's such a big question. I mean, depending on the size of the company and what your sort of key HR outputs are, some HR teams are more focused on recruiting, others on training, etc. I would say one of two ways. One is to sort of pick one sort of high touch point aspect of your service delivery and pursue innovation within sort of a pilot group, a small group of people or teams within your company that you know to be sort of high adopters of new technology and new ways of doing things. In fact, that would be the way I would definitely focus. So, pick something that is relatively important and, cast a group of folks that are going to embrace a new way of doing things, and then from that, merchandise your findings and your wins back to the rest of the business to drive a more comprehensive launch.
Yeah, definitely. William, do you have additional thoughts around that?
Yeah, there's no such thing as an HR industry. People that work in HR work in the industries that they work in. So I would look at people that are in your industry and what they use. So peer groups, I always advocate leveraging your peers. People like Lisa. If you're in that particular industry, reach out to Lisa and say, hey, what are you thinking about? What are you using? Because it comes down to industry, for me at least, and again, I'll speak for myself, it comes down to industry first. There's software that is dominant and better within specific industries. So something that's really great in the retail industry might not be great in the light manufacturing industry, etc. So I want to find out what works within my industry, to what works at the size of company, because it is different at the SMB and global level. So, depending on size of co. And I think there's also something to be said about geography. Something that might work really well in Manchester, England, might not work really well in Tampa, Florida. And so there's another layer of cut that might be made with geography, but I wouldn't start there. I'd start with industry, with peer groups, with your own peer groups in your respective industry. Find out what really works for them, what technology stack really works for them. Start there and then start to strip away both size of company and geography to get down to a nice short list.
Okay, great. Next question. I work for a more conservative organization that resists change. How would you suggest I get buy-in from other groups and senior management? Lisa, you want to start?
Yes. I mean, it's it's a problem that we all deal with on varying scales, depending on how conservative your organization is. I would sort of point back to several of the the discussions we've had thus far, which is to rather than perhaps wake up one day and say the end goal is going to be HR technology innovation, think about what are the real problems that your organization is facing now. Is it you're running or you're carrying, let's say, a multi-million-dollar liability on your financial books for a PTO payout, or you're having an unhealthy level of attrition attributed to lack of career development. Think of what are some of the recurring themes you hear from your employees and your executives. What are your pain points, and how can you solve for that? So I think rather than being overwhelmed by this notion of having to transform an entire ecosystem, just picking a problem that is sort of self-diagnosed and responding to it with a combination of sort of strategic thinking and technology as a vehicle to kind of set the stage for a more transformative culture.
Lisa nailed it. I think the other thing I'd add is, this is a case of, you're not going to make people that are conservative not conservative. You can't force them to be different. One thing that I would say is rational thought and logic beat emotion when it comes to kind of convincing people of why to make a certain decision. So to convince them, I think you take something like the retention of top talent. Will this change help you retain your top talent? If you could prove that, the dot relationship of that, then conservative people will make the investment because it's in their best interest. So you, along the way, you have to make it in their best interest. And if you can make it in their best interest with rational thought and logic, then they have nowhere other place to go other than to take your recommendation and go with it.
Yeah, those are both really great recommendations. We have a lot more questions, but we're actually over on time, so I apologize to everyone that we're running a little bit over. If you did ask a question and we did not respond to you yet, we'll send you an email with a response after. I'd like to thank Lisa and William so much for their invaluable insights today. I think we can all agree we learned a lot from this webinar. As a reminder to everyone, please be on the lookout for a recording of this webinar and a link to the Gartner research note. And in the coming days, you'll see an invitation to the next webinar in this series. Thank you all for your time and participation. We hope you have a wonderful day.